When an individual chooses a life of solitude, shunning the need to vent to others, refusing to beg for support, and standing entirely on their own 2 feet, the world is quick to label them as strange. But the reality is far more profound. That person is not strange. They are dangerous, not in the sense of being a threat to others, but in the sense that they have become impossible to govern. They cannot be broken, they cannot be bent to the will of others, and they certainly cannot be exploited. This message is dedicated to those who feel like outsiders, the ones who wonder if there is something wrong with them simply because they don't conform to the crowd. If you find yourself questioning your worth because you lack a vast social circle, constant companionship, or the endless validation that others seem to crave, take a moment. Listen closely, for by the end of this, you may begin to see your own life through an entirely new lens. Society is programmed to assume that solitude is synonymous with weakness. Most people perceive the solitary individual as frightened, disconnected, or damaged. However, reality is quite the opposite. The person who has mastered the art of being alone has successfully navigated one of life's most grueling trials. They have moved beyond the need for approval, the hunger for applause, and the reliance on the constant presence of others. When someone reaches this stage, when they truly need nothing from anyone else, they become exceptionally difficult to manipulate. And that is exactly what unsettles the status quo. It is important to remember that nobody arrives at this level of self-sufficiency overnight. This evolution is often born from a path paved with trials. It is the story of someone who gave their trust and was betrayed, someone who offered love and received only disappointment, someone who stood by others, only to find themselves standing entirely alone when they needed support the most. Over time, they learned a hard lesson that most people spend their lives avoiding. People change, appearances are often deceptive, and the only person you can consistently rely on is yourself. Here is where the transformation happens. That pain could have destroyed them, but instead, it forged them. Much like the way extreme pressure transforms raw carbon into a diamond, those hardships refined their character. They stopped operating blindly. They ceased making assumptions and started observing with clarity. Through this process, a new kind of awareness emerged. They began to recognize the patterns in human behavior, not just listening to what people say, but understanding what they actually mean. They look past actions to see the underlying intentions. They spot the inconsistencies, the subtle signals, and the vast gap between empty words and genuine behavior. When you can see the hidden motives and the transactional nature of certain help, you become nearly impossible to deceive. Others find this threatening, because, in the presence of someone who sees clearly, pretense crumbles. Consequently, people might label them as distant, cold, or unreachable. In truth, they have simply established boundaries. Boundaries are not the artifacts of the weak. They are the safeguards of those who understand the true value of their time, their energy, and their focus. They do not allow just anyone into their inner circle. They choose carefully. This selectivity inevitably creates distance from those who were accustomed to having unrestricted access, people who benefited from your lack of limits and expected you to be perpetually available, agreeable, and easy to sway. When those people disappear, it isn't a loss. It is a refinement. Ultimately, the person who can sit in solitude and feel truly at peace is the freest soul in existence. They don't need wild parties to feel alive, nor do they crave constant external validation to feel complete. They are perfectly comfortable in their own company, lost in their own thoughts and the sanctity of their silence. This level of freedom is incredibly rare. Most people are terrified of being alone, which is why they remain trapped in draining relationships, restrictive environments, and superficial connections, all held together solely by the fear of being empty. But once you have learned to be alone, you are liberated from that fear, and that changes everything. If you do not seek approval, no one can control you with praise. If you do not crave company, no one can trap you with their presence. If you do not depend on someone else for love, no one can threaten you by withholding it. You move beyond the reach of pressure, fear, and manipulation. You become a person who cannot be bought, intimidated, or forced into anything that does not align with your truth. Being a loner does not mean you harbor a dislike for humanity. It simply means you honor your time. You don't distribute it cheaply, you invest it wisely. You might only have 1 or 2 people in your life, but those connections are authentic, deep, and built on truth rather than convenience. You understand the fundamental truth that most ignore. Being surrounded by the wrong people only deepens your loneliness, whereas being alone creates the space to finally breathe. If you are living this way, remember, your peace is your greatest asset. Do not trade it for shallow connections. Do not let it be eroded by unnecessary drama or the opinions of those who cannot understand your path. People will talk. They will say you have changed or that you have become distant. Let them. You do not owe anyone an explanation for your growth. At the end of the day, there are 2 kinds of people: those who dissolve into the crowd, constantly adjusting their personality to fit in, and those who walk their own path with quiet, independent resolve. The first path is easier, but it costs you your identity. The second path is harder, but it rewards you with your freedom. If you feel different, if you walk alone, do not mistake it for a weakness. It is your greatest strength. The person who can walk alone can travel further than anyone else. They don't wait for permission, they build the road. They don't follow the crowd, they define the destination. Protect your peace. Recognize your power. You aren't broken, you are refined. And refined people are, by definition, the rarest of all.